Hello, I'm Molly Elizabeth Agnew, founder of Eternal Goddess, and welcome back to the Beyond the Seams podcast. You may have noticed in the last week or so that it was the 2022 Met Gala, and so, of course, we're going to be talking about it. Specifically, the entire Kim Kardashian, Marilyn Monroe, JFK dress shenanigans. Joining me to discuss this is Vasi Birchwood, who also goes by V.Birchwood online, a very good friend of mine and someone who I have had on the Eternal Goddess YouTube channel before. I do hope you enjoy our little chat about the entire situation and fashion preservation. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes and more from Eternal Goddess, make sure you're following us on Instagram. Hello!
Hi, Molly.
Thanks very much for joining me. Can you start by explaining to the people who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Vasi, or I go by the name V.Birchwood online, and I'm a daily wearer of historical fashion as well as a historical fashion enthusiast. And I hand sew all the garments that I make for myself, which is really fun. So I'm really into preserving really antique types of sewing and sewing before we even had machinery and things to help us with it. So yeah, that's basically who I am in a nutshell.
This is probably a good time to know, for those that don't know or those that are new to Eternal Goddess, me and Vasi did a video last year?
Yeah, I think it was
last year
summer.
For the YouTube channel, all about how you wear historical clothing and you sew all of that. So that there is it's a long video. It's on the YouTube channel. If you want to know more about Vasi and listen to us talk some more, that's there with some bonus content for you. But that is not what we're here to talk about today.
Nope.
At time of recording, it is a week and 2 days since the 2022 Met Gala, and obviously we're going to talk about it because there's a big conversation going on about Kim Kardashian, Marilyn Monroe, and historical fashion. So, for those unaware, I don't know how you're unaware. Have you been living under a rock? I don't know. It seems like it's all over the internet.
Even I know, and I literally
Met
live
Gala,
under a rock. So
literally. So Kim Kardashian, she wore the infamous JFK Happy Birthday gown designed by Jean-Louis for Marilyn Monroe at the Met Gala last week. The actual dress. The real one on her body. And it's caused quite a large conversation about wearing such historical items of clothing, whether we should do that, what we should do instead, is it right, is it wrong? Of course I have opinions, and Vasi does too, and if anyone is going to be good to talk on this topic, it's someone who has her own very impressive collection of historical garments, and a good interest in preservation. So, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
yeah, well, I mean, I'm a non-dualist, so
answer.
good and bad, it's I guess it depends who we ask, right? So I think that it was detrimental to the historicalness of the garment. So I think that's where I kind of really draw the line with wearing vintage clothes, as if something has extreme historical significance. And probably the most expensive gown in the world is, from what I understand about Marilyn Monroe's gown, I would say that has extreme
I think it
significance.
sold at Ripley's. We'll come back to Ripley's. It sold, I think it was 2016, for over 4 million.
Yeah, I think it was.
I mean, this is one of the most
4.7.
expensive dresses in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Extortionate amounts of money.
I think it resells as well for over 5 million. So it's a really expensive gown. So to me it's a problem because I don't think there's a way to responsibly wear a gown with that material either, because it's silk chiffon, I believe, and it's heavily heated.
Yeah.
So
Highly flammable. I've also read that we don't use that specific form of material anymore because it will make you go up in flames.
yeah, there's a lot of materials though today which I think are similar, some types of polyester are very flammable,
Yeah.
and cotton even, but yeah,
Don't go near a naked
no.
flame.
We just don't have open flame as much in our homes anymore, so it's a different kind of life. So, but yeah, I think that the issue is really that it's such a historically important garment. It's one thing to wear a dress from the 50s or 60s, and I think that's totally fine if you treat it with respect and it's in good condition to begin with. But one like that was worn by such an icon in history and for such a historic event, I think that that's really the issue. Is is it's not only a
Yeah.
delicate dress to begin with, and probably the most expensive one, it's also one that, has incredible significance. So I think it's a problem when celebrities and wealth can essentially buy you the ability to wear history. That I think that's the big
Yeah.
issue is like, why is that a thing? Why isn't this being locked down in the
Yeah.
museum?
Well, this is something that a lot of people have been talking about, and I've seen a lot of, well, Kim Kardashian can do what she wants, or if you had the opportunity to wear Marilyn Monroe's dress, you would. Which, by the way,
I wouldn't
no, I
either.
wouldn't. I'd be absolutely
Hmm.
petrified. I wouldn't even touch it, like let alone put it on my body. But that's by the by. Um, is this is one of the first. Obviously, in the past, celebrities have worn dresses like this. I can't remember who. Someone wore, the iconic black Gilda dress that Rita Hayworth wore
Yeah.
in Gilda. Now, because it was a film, there were multiple versions of the dress, because it's very rare that there is just one as a costume. And she wore one of the other ones at a red carpet event. I can't remember who. I'm so sorry. I will add it in if I can remember at some point later. And that, I feel, is sort of different, but very much leans on a this could go either way on whether this is good or bad. The problem is Kim Kardashian has this massive influence. And when you, as someone with that much influence, can be seen to get away with doing something like this, it not only, of course, has an impact on the general public who now think it's okay, and don't are even further away from understanding fashion preservation and the importance of fashion history. But other celebrities might start doing similar things in the future. I think it's probably worthy because I've seen this going around, a lot of people not understanding the actual importance of the dress itself, let alone fashion importance, but the actual specific gown. So for those unaware, Marilyn Monroe, massive, massive, massive icon of the 50s, died in 62
Yeah, early 60s, I
or
believe.
63.
Yeah.
Yeah, very early 60s. She wore this dress in the last year of her life to sing happy birthday to the, at the time, President John F. Kennedy. He was a woman. John F. Kennedy, who she was having relations with as well as his brother. And it was one of the last things that the public ever really saw her do. The dress caused a lot of scandal at the time. It was designed to make her look naked, but that she had diamonds encrusted all over her. We're used to naked dresses now, but it kind of was the original, like, red carpet naked dress. More than that, it was made for her own measurements, and she had to be sewn into it.
Yeah.
Kim Kardashian couldn't fit.
Yeah.
And this is where we get to the damage, which I'll let you take over because you know far more about clothing damage than I do.
Yeah. So I believe, trigger warning with regards to
Discussions of weight loss
and eating disorders. Yeah. So
Mhm.
she claims she didn't eat for 16 days or
3
like
weeks.
3 weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
Before wearing Marilyn Monroe's dress. And this is a problem for a lot of reasons because clothing is not meant, we're not meant to fit into clothes. Clothes are meant to fit us. And I
100%.
stand by that fully. And there were a lot of issues with the Victorian era, but that is a very Victorian value that, you add padding and create this silhouette and then you build the clothes on top of that foundation. And you don't need to be a certain size to do that. You can be any size. It's just creating a certain shape. And this is the exact opposite of that, trying to squeeze yourself into someone else's dress, which is already very fragile and in a very fragile state. There's a lot of kind of dispute as to like as well whether or not she actually wore the dress, whether or not she wore it for just the red carpet and then like wore a replica. And it's totally possible to make a really good replica. Lana Del Rey did it for, I think, a music video, and it looked great. Everyone got it. It was Marilyn Monroe's dress. Everyone got the reference. So not only are there more of the diet culture issues that we see all the time on the red carpet, and that's very detrimental. We're showing young females that this is what you're supposed to do to fit into a garment, which is like the exact thing that I think we need to be steering away from. So that's the issue. And then also, yeah, the fact that she didn't fit into the dress and it created the damage and everything. And also, like, there's probably body oils. You can't ever not have creams, oils, etc. It doesn't matter how clean you are, etc. You always emit oil. You have skin. So washing the dress makes it decrease in value. Wearing it out and not keeping it in a vault also decreases its value. There's so many reasons why the value would get diminished.
Well, at first, I mean, just going back, they say that she only wore the actual dress on the red carpet and then moved into a replica, which brings me to the fact, if a replica existed, why would you just not wear the replica the entire time and risk such damage to such a dress? The dress didn't do up over her backside. Marilyn, by the way, was very, very, very tiny, contrary to popular belief that she was a plus-size woman. She wasn't. I've got a video on the Eternal Goddess YouTube all about that. But Kim couldn't do it up at the back. Fine, whatever. Like, we're not all the same shapes and sizes. So she covered it with a fur coat. It's not really worth it, I don't think. Obviously, trying to squeeze your body into someone else's dress is going to cause structural damage. That goes without saying. But there are also a lot of things that people are pointing out that will have caused structural damage. Ripley's put out a video showing Kim getting dressed in it, and they used gloves, and they were sort of scraping the dress up her body. Now, a lot of people think that when it comes to handling precious items, you should use gloves. Would you like to tell us why you shouldn't?
Yeah,
or at least why some people believe you shouldn't.
So cotton gloves or like fabric gloves, they can leave fibers onto the garments. So that's a big reason why a lot of people tend not to. And nitrile gloves are usually the go-to if you do use gloves. And the problem with nitrile gloves is we had obviously the pandemic, so there was a huge shortage of them. So for a while, like all of us antique collectors were just doing no gloves. And I think as long as you wash your hands, and I always like sanitize my hands with like ethanol in between touching. So I like let the ethanol totally dry out off my hands and everything. And then I go and I grab my antiques, which is, yeah. So in general, fabric gloves, not ideal. Nitrile are okay, and especially with really old garments, it makes sense. But then the best thing is just to touch them with clean hands.
To my understanding, I mean, obviously I don't know as much about this specific world as you do, but to my knowledge, I immediately saw that and went, oh, this is bad. And they were scraping across the beads. There was 2,500 beads, diamonds on the dress, which makes up the majority of the dress. And I was looking at it and them scraping it and going, there's definitely not 2,500 anymore. Those are definitely falling off or getting damaged. And the reason for this is that it's held by a private collection. I am a massive Indiana Jones fan. It's my favourite film franchise in the world. It belongs in a museum. But Ripley's is not a museum. It's a private collection for profit. And that's sort of where it goes wrong, because this dress shouldn't be with Ripley's. Private collections are an interesting conversation, I suppose, because we all have our own little private collections of things. I have my own little private collections of vintage and antiques. You have a very impressive collection of antiques. What sort of procedures are in place in most museums that hold and house historical fashion garments? What are those protocols in order to preserve them as perfectly as humanly possible?
Yeah, so they're temperature regulated, first of all. So they have rooms that keep a certain temperature. That's something that amateur private collectors like me can't really accomplish. I know some private collectors who have like maybe larger collections will start to create specialized temperature controlled rooms in their homes. But you have to have some money for that, and
it costs a lot of money.
So it's not accessible to everybody. And I guess like it's arguable that antique collecting isn't accessible to a lot of people anyways, because they can be expensive, but you can also find good deals sometimes. But that's beside the point. So there's temperature regulation. Then also there is storage and archival boxes, which are made of acid-free paper. They're often wrapped in acid-free tissue paper as well, and they're packed in. So like, for instance, if you have arm folds at the sleeves, you would pack them in with more tissue paper to produce less wrinkling. I do that as well with my collection, but the archival boxes often cost the same as the antiques sometimes, so it can be so expensive. There's sometimes like 30 to 60 quid for like a single box, and you're like, this is literally paper. But yeah, it can get really pricey. It's crazy. And then on top of that too, they have a whole staff that literally just work with organizing, keeping them clean, checking them, keeping them, making sure there's no mold, mildew, moths, any vermin. So there is a bit of a labor intensive thing to having a private collection or having a museum collection as well, which is that you need to be checking your garments at least monthly, ideally. And in museums, it's probably done even more than that because they've got people full time around the clock taking care of these antiques. And in museum collections, I highly doubt they would ever allow someone to wear it, even someone with influence like a celebrity.
It's like rule number one. Don't touch it unless you know what you're doing, and do not, under any circumstances, let someone put it on. I suppose, touching on how expensive it is to look after antique pieces is important because, going back to the Met Gala itself, the Met has a fabulous fashion institute, and the Met Gala itself is in order to raise money for the Fashion Institute because they do not get any kind of governmental funding, unlike the rest of the Met. Hence why we are even having this conversation. Ripley's obviously is private, and therefore they have to raise money by showing these clothes so that they can keep themselves going. The Marilyn dress has been on display for a lot of years. I think normally in California they have it on display. The fact that it's been on display for so long consistently, I suppose leads one to assume that it has lost, it's damaged itself just a bit purely from that. So, in no way is in the same shape that it was when it came to them originally. And yet they still allowed someone to wear it. I think this is probably a good way to segue into what I know we definitely both have opinions on, and that is the importance of fashion history. I have seen a lot of rather strongly worded conversations on the internet in the past week about people going, well, fashion's just clothes, wear what you want, it's just a dress. And then other people on the other side, the side that we're on, getting rather heated, rightly so, about the importance of fashion and historical garments. As someone who studies these garments in so much detail, why is it important that we keep these clothes?
Well, I've never known anything to tell us more directly about a person in history than clothes. And that's because we lived in them. And I think that a garment can tell you so much about an individual. You can see alterations, you can see how they may be changed. Obviously, we can only speculate as to like what the actual person went through, but it's really fun to see a garment and go, oh, maybe they were pregnant here and that's why it was let out here, or maybe, like they wore this until they were much older and so that's why it was let out here, because maybe they gained a little bit of weight, or maybe they lost some weight, or, also sometimes you'll find like hairs on garments and you're like, whoa, this is a hair. And garments typically have a lot of sweat stains too, so it kind of like reminds you I know it's a little gross to some people, but it's very human. You see how human it is to sweat and to have like stains under your armpits and things like this. And also like the crustiest dress shields ever, like dress shields are like these fabric circles that you put into the underarms of garments a lot of the time historically. And they can be completely just clotted with like dried sweat and things. And I find this so fascinating. I mean, it's like kind of a bit, like grotesque and weird, because the thing too is everybody who wore these garments has now long passed. So it's like, essentially you're like looking at the sweat of a dead person, which is I'm really into like mortuary history and stuff. So for me, it's really,
Me too. We need to have that
yeah.
conversation in private
So there's
sometime,
that element
please.
of it. Like it's a very human experience. But on top of that too, fashion directly related to the historical events of the time. So during the French Revolution, you had the change in silhouette of going much higher up to the empire waist, and that was a direct relation to the events going on at the time. And also, in general, the whole change from linen and silk being primary materials to suddenly an influx of cotton, that all had to deal with historical events as well. So there's all these moments in history where historical events were directly influencing people's clothing and attire. And it's the perfect way for us to see sort of what was going on, not only in the lives of people who we don't have names for, but also on a greater scale of things in a society. And unfortunately, we have a lot of bias because only some garments have survived, and mostly upper class garments have survived because, working class individuals probably would have worn their garments to shreds and then passed it down to the next person. They weren't going to waste any kind of silk, they weren't going to just throw it in a box and forget about it. So there are a lot of issues with that, and there's a lot of gaps that we need to fill in, and I think that we might not ever be able to. But it's a really good start for understanding humanity a little bit deeper, and in some aspects too, understanding psychology of humans a little bit deeper. For instance, wearing buttons at the end of the Victorian period, that was very much like a showy thing, because it meant it'd be a lot harder to alter a garment if it were to not fit you anymore, because a lot of lace up and pin up and wrapper type garments are easy to modify because they're very adjustable. So there's just these little things that you keep seeing all throughout fashion history that tell you so much about a society and about individual people as well.
Completely. 100%. I mean, you don't need me to agree with that. You know where I stand on all
We're
of this.
super biased though. We're like on the side
but
where we like really love fashion history,
yeah.
so
Yeah, I'm not going to lie that any of our opinions are unbiased here. I am not a public news channel. I can have my opinion. And, obviously when we're talking about that, we're talking about really old antique stuff. And this Marilyn dress, which, by the way, sorry, this seems like a good point to point out. She didn't just wear one Marilyn dress, she actually then wore another. She wore a second one in the evening. But let's still just focus on the first one in general. That Marilyn dress is only 60 years old. It's not that old. It's not an antique. It is technically vintage. And we all know about Marilyn Monroe. Oh, do we really need to preserve it? Like, we all know. It's all out there in the public eye. The point is, at some point, if our planet lasts and our species lasts long enough, our descendants will eventually come across the clothes that we currently wear. And they will use what they can find, like how we've used what we can find from our medieval ancestors and our Roman ancestors to figure out about their societies. And they will find this dress, hopefully, and go, now what's going on here? And if we have left enough to them, they will be able to see, okay, there was this woman called Marilyn Monroe, and she was this mega movie star, but she was commodified and she was used and she was abused, and she had relationships with the president at the time. And what was he doing at the time? How was JFK really important to society in the 60s? And before you know it, from one dress, you have mapped out the landscape of America in the early 1960s.
yeah.
This is why it's important. It's not just a dress. It is a dress with historical significance. Far more than, the white shirt I'm wearing right now. This holds no historical significance. Unless suddenly it turned out I was mistress to the brother of the President of the United States. Which I'm not.
I'd be really shocked.
That would be very impressive. So... yeah, I mean, it's we could both sit here and ramble for hours about historical significance and preservation. Sticking to preservation, the difference between clothing and jewellery quickly. So both of us are very much on the don't wear antiques unless you know what you're doing, and it's your own private collection that doesn't have major historical significance. But what about jewellery? Because it's very common for celebrities to walk around wearing very old pieces of jewellery. The royal families of Europe still wear jewels that, Napoleon had made. Do you think there is very much a difference between wearing antique jewelry versus antique clothing?
100%. And that's because of the material. Metal has to be melted down in order to make damage to it. So in a general collection, that isn't going to impact the metal. And, if you're just keeping it normal upkeep, like cleaning it regularly if you can with responsible solutions that are okay for it. And it's easy to fix as well. So a silk gown, if it tears, you might do more damage to the garment by trying to fix it. And you probably won't be able to perfectly mimic the actual historical qualities of it. So jewelry, if the latch breaks, there are plenty of people qualified out there to fix your latch and perhaps even mold one into an antique type one, like a T-hinge.
Well, that happened to our current Queen Elizabeth. On her wedding day, her tiara broke just before she left for Westminster Abbey.
Wow.
Just the latch went at the back, but because it was a piece of jewellery, it was fine. They got it fixed, and off she went down the aisle.
If she had torn her silk dress or something, that would not have been the case.
Oh, she'd have been absolutely screwed.
So that's the difference, is the material.
It would have ruined the day.
The materials are so different. It doesn't get affected by the skin oils and things like that. I mean, a natural fiber is never going to hold up to a piece of metal. It's just a totally different thing. These jewels, too, have been in the ground for God knows how many years. And they're going to last many more. They're going to probably be the last thing left on Earth if something were to happen. It'd be like cockroaches and diamonds and these paste stones and things that we have, So I think it's very different. And I think it's a great 100%. Way to appreciate and enjoy history. As well, like historical home goods, so like furniture, old sewing boxes, things like that, because I think those really deserve to have another life, and garments, I think, deserve to be preserved. And I think it varies too, like silk garments and those types of materials are a lot more fragile, so I would never wear them personally, but I know that it's very much a spectrum, and like some people definitely would, and that's totally okay. I don't think we need to shame anyone for their choices with it and such. Just you hope that they're doing it responsibly. But then things like cotton underwear, like I have less of a qualm about wearing those because every single person would have had a set of those. It doesn't have a uniqueness, a significance, and it's also material that was repeatedly boiled. So it's very sturdy and durable. So there's certain things where it makes more sense that people wear it. But yeah, jewelry, 100%, I think it's great to keep showing those things to the world.
To round up, final overall thoughts. Good, bad, what would you suggest people do to learn more about fashion preservation and in general the importance of fashion history? Which of course involves following Vasi on social media.
Thank you. I would say look to museums who preserve these things all the time, who have direct experience for tips and tricks if you're starting your own collections. Definitely keep your eyes open for antiques and garments if you're wanting to collect, because they're not always exorbitantly expensive, and you too can help to preserve history. And that's really cool. Mm-hmm. It's nice to have that little role in society of helping to preserve a few things for the future generations if we have them. And it's so dark to talk about this stuff with Gen Z or millennials, because and most of all too, just take it on a case-by-case basis. If something has really strong historical significance, maybe consider not wearing it, or keeping it in a safe kind of protected environment. Definitely consider nuance in the matter, and think of fashion as being important, because it is. There's a reason why it's so prominent still today. Is we literally all have to wear clothes, and there's nothing else in the world that everybody has to do really, except things like eating, drinking, and wearing clothes, unless you're in a nudist colony or something, which is a different story. But yeah, most people wear clothes, and that can tell us so much about people, and I think that's important.
Final thing. Where can people find you? Anything to plug? Anything you want to get out into the world?
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about what I do in my weird little life. You can find me at V.Birchwood on YouTube and Vasi Birchwood on Instagram. And I did make a TikTok as well, which I think is V.Birchwood. I avoided TikTok for years, and then
I think it is.
yeah, and now I'm like, oh, I'm on TikTok.
She finally caved. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. I don't watch anything on there because I know it's
Making
like a black
very,
hole.
very, very good content.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I try to like keep it cinematic, even if it's TikTok.
It is a very big black hole.
It is. Yeah, so I just only post and then
very good.
look at a couple friends and leave. But yeah, so
Then dip,
yeah.
post and leave. Thank you for listening to the Beyond the Seams podcast and joining me and Vasi as we discuss the Met Gala, Kim Kardashian, Marilyn Monroe, and fashion preservation. If you want to keep up to date with more from Eternal Goddess and future episodes, make sure you're following us on Instagram.